What is the coaching carousel taught the Minnesota Vikings? There are going to be a lot of changes with this team, some of which are completely out of their control. Brian Flores could be a head coach. We still have no idea what he's going to do. The top candidate for the defensive coordinator position, if he leaves, could be out the door too. How other head coaches are affecting the Minnesota Vikings is a real thing as well. And there's one interesting element that we haven't talked about yet. Well, I'm sure Dave and Darren did yesterday, but I haven't. And that was the Vikings not retaining Chris Kuper. We're going to talk about all that and more here on the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness, with me as always in the top of corners, producer Dave, and some really interesting developments over the course of the weekend. One, let's laugh at the Chicago Bears, who unfortunately fortunately for us, are not advancing to the NFC Championship game. I think it's fair to say that that team is a little bit fraudulent, and it finally came back to bite him in the butt. DJ Moore quitting on a route, at least that's the perception. Bad look. The Rams, Seahawks, Dave, I don't know if
Ben Johnson has as many playoff wins or more playoff wins than KOC.
That's 1 year. That's fine. They beat the Packers. KOC.
So did we.
Yeah. That game half counts. But anyways, what's interesting about that Rams Seahawks game is it's going to be the best playoff game ever by DVOA. Both the two teams are they're the top two teams in DVOA on the year, and their combined DVOA is above 80 percentage points, which is just crazy to think about. It's the number one offense versus number one defense. Both games this year were phenomenal, and now we get it one more time. Can't ask for much better. And on the other side, we don't have to watch Bo Nix, which I know warms my heart. I feel bad for him, but I don't have to watch him. That rules for me. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the coaching carousel, because the Vikings aren't looking to hire a head coach. They're not looking to hire a general manager, but they don't have a defensive coordinator right now. And that is a huge factor in this entire scope of the coaching carousel. But we're going to start here with the offensive line coach. The news dropped on Saturday afternoon that the Minnesota Vikings would not be retaining Chris Kuper. And this is important language. They're not retaining him. They did not fire him. They are not renewing his contract. And I think that's an important distinction here. It essentially means the same thing, where they're moving on, they're parting ways. But they didn't fire him from his position. They're just choosing to go a different way. And if you've ever worked in a industry that does contracts, this is a pretty normal thing. You finish out your contract, you move on, the company moves on as well. And that's kind of what the Vikings are doing here. And the offensive line, I've kind of been defending it, and I've been kind of looking up some stuff to see, hey, how much of it was actually on the offensive line, how much of it was on the quarterbacks, how much of it was on like the coaching staff. And I've started to find some really interesting data. And I think looking at that is a really interesting aspect to this whole conversation, because Chris Kuper, I think, is a good football coach. I also think it's completely fair to want to go a different direction because of how things transpired this year, how things have transpired over the 4 years of his tenure. I think both of those things can be true at the same time. We just saw Sean McDermott lose his job after being literal inches away from making the AFC Championship game. So, and I personally, I think you just got Tony Dungy. You just need a new voice in the room. It kind of is what it is. So with Chris Kuper, I think that there were a lot of positives with his coaching. I also think there were a lot of question marks. One of those being the Vikings just could not pass off stunts very well. Some of which had to do with kind of like leverage and positioning. and there are like a couple different schools of thought on how to handle like rushers in the angle you take. Do you want to take them at an angle, or do you want to just completely square up with them? Those two schools of thought really contradict each other, and those who believe in those schools are very passionate about it. So that plays into this whole conversation. And I'm not going to tell you which side is right or which side is wrong. There are merits to both sides. And if you want kind of a breakdown, I'm sure Luke Braun, our friend at Locked On Vikings, has something on his Patreon. You should probably go check that out. He does a lot of really cool O-line stuff. But one of the big things with Kuper was they just couldn't figure out how to stay consistent enough. And I think this year is a little bit unfair to really pin on Kuper because there's so many different layers of issues that kept arising. And the main issue was injuries. So I can't remember the exact number, but I think the starting 5 offensive linemen played something like 88 snaps together. Like a very, very low number where all 5 of them, the projected starters going into the year, played together. That in itself makes it really hard for an offensive line coach to be able to have any kind of cohesiveness. That's a problem. And I took a look at some of the data and I started compiling it. We had this year, the starting 5 offensive linemen played a combined total of 3,340 snaps. The Vikings as an offense as a whole had just over 1,000. Backup offensive linemen played 1,658 snaps. So about half the snaps, about 1/3 of the snaps were played by backups. And you have 5 starters. You're not going to keep all 5 starters healthy throughout the year. There's going to be players who get banged up. There's going to be a game or 2 missed. But we're talking significant games missed here. Brian O'Neill missed multiple games. Christian Darrisaw missed multiple games. Ryan Kelly missed the majority of the season. Donovan Jackson had that wrist injury. It was a problem. And we even had it that final drive against Cleveland Browns. Will Fries was the only starting offensive lineman on the field late in that game, and they still found a way to come back and win. So taking a look, the starting 5 offensive linemen per Pro Football Focus charting, and I know Pro Football Focus grades, I don't love the algorithm aspect of putting like a quantifiable number on a performance like that. I'm not a fan of it, but I do really enjoy a lot of their charting and kind of how the rules for some of their charting stuff I think are pretty good, which is why I like to use it. 3,340 snaps for the starting offensive lineman. They allowed 1 pressure for every 31.5 snaps played, or 6.3 plays, because if you have all 5 on the field, 6.3 plays. All right. 106 total pressures throughout 17 games. That's not a terrible number for your starting offensive lineman. When you go to the backups, they played 1,658 snaps and had 67 pressures allowed. That rate is 2/3 as good as the starters. 24.75 snaps per pressure, or every 4.95 plays. Not exactly great, right? So that in itself is to be expected, where your backup offensive linemen aren't going to play as good as your starters. Why I wanted to kind of look at this and see how it breaks down is because
those are total snaps, not dropbacks.
No, these are specifically pass blocking snaps.
Okay.
They're only pass blocking snaps. So I wanted to take a look at that, and I wanted to take a look at one other section of data, which is how sacks got distributed per Pro Football Focus charting. Okay. And to me, this is the number one. I've said in the past that the quarterbacks are responsible for 30 sacks. I'm incorrect on that, because I went and I actually found, instead of just deducting all the blocking sacks and then subtracting it from the total number, which was 60. One of the big things that I found was they actually have a section of quarterback sacks, to where they are responsible for these sacks. And here's a funny stat. Jackson Dart had the most sacks most sacks responsible for. So quarterbacks can create pressure. And one of the things I've talked about a lot is quarterbacks can make the offensive line look really good. They can make the offensive line look really bad. And we saw it a lot with Sam Darnold last year, where he did such a good job of navigating the pocket, climbing it. The best example was that touchdown to Justin Jefferson against the Seattle Seahawks, where you're getting a huge rush from Cam Robinson off the edge. He kind of climbs into the A-gap, moves forward, and throws it, he's under pressure. It's a dirty pocket. Those things make an offensive line look significantly better than they are. And because of that, you have extra elements to kind of break that down and understand that, hey, a quarterback can navigate those things. And that's why looking at where pressures come from is a really important factor here too. So Jackson Dart had 24 sacks on pressures, and he was responsible. He had 128 pressure dropbacks this year. 39.1% of them were on him. Oofta. That's a hefty number. For contrast, J.J. McCarthy had 98 total pressures as a quarterback, and of those, 18 were on him. So 18.4%. Looks to be about average. I think he ranks 25th in that stat. Not too bad. Max Brosmer is at 22.2% at 16th. And Carson Wentz is at 40th at 15.3%. Now remember, lower number is good. So being at 40th is a good thing for Carson Wentz. If you want to go invert, let's see, I'm going to have to change it. So invert, who's the best? Oddly enough, Michael Penix Jr. is at number 1 at 3.2% of pressures accounted for. And this can be a little bit of a flawed statistic. Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson are among the highest on the list. It's because they create so much outside of structure that those numbers are going to be a little bit inflated. I think when you look at a quarterback like Jared Goff, if Goff is going to get pressured, it's almost always going to be because of somebody else and not because of him, because he doesn't move. He's stationary. The pressure is going to come right at him. So with the Vikings quarterbacks, they'll move around a little bit, but they're not going to move around a ton. So from my individual perspective, those numbers are actually going to be somewhat reliable. They're going to be somewhat consistent because they are not doing anything with their legs to intentionally create pressure. They're not like sliding just because they want to just move around. They're not trying to do those things. So taking a look, like, that's not too bad. Carson Wentz was 16th in the NFL at 15.3%, and J.J. McCarthy is at 29th. So not great. That's out of 41 qualifying quarterbacks. It is what it is. But for context, Patrick Mahomes is 38th. Lamar Jackson is 39th. Not great, Bob. But that's why with some of these stats, you need to bring in that context. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to see how sacks got distributed. And that was the overarching point of this. 26 of the 60 sacks were credited to the offensive line. And when you look at who was getting the most sacks, it's crazy how they were distributed. So sacks by starters. Will Fries had 3 sacks allowed. Christian Darrisaw had 2. Brian O'Neill had 2. Donovan Jackson had 2. And Ryan Kelly had 1. So 10 of the 60 sacks were allowed by starting offensive linemen. And when we talk about pressures are not created equal. There's the stat floating around that Alec Lewis quoted, I believe it was from Next Gen Stats that Dave and I were talking about pre-show, where the Vikings were either the worst or second worst in sacks, pressure, and then quick pressures, which is, I believe, with Next Gen Stats, it's charted under 2.5 seconds. I believe that's the threshold. Not all pressures are created equal. Sacks are essentially a 100th percentile pressure, meaning that it is the best possible outcome for the defense other than a turnover touchdown. Like just a standard play, a pressure turning into a sack is a phenomenal outcome. But a pressure can turn into anything. So looking at just pressures alone does not give you the full scope. And that's why looking at some of the chipped data, which Next Gen Stats uses, ESPN's pass block win rate had the Vikings at 25th in the league. Remember last year, they had the Vikings at like 2nd or 3rd, pretty much the entire year, because most of those pressures that were allowed by the Vikings offensive line were because Sam Darnold was 3rd in time to throw. And that's where using one metric alone isn't going to give you the whole piece to the puzzle. It's going to be a part of it by using, hey, Sam Darnold has a very long time to throw, but the pass block win rate is really good. Okay. Then why is he getting so much pressure? It's because those pressures are coming at 3, 4, and 5 seconds. And therefore, when you see Cam Robinson give up 8 or 9 pressures, which he did a couple times last year, but he has a PFF grade of like 65, in your brain, it's not going to compute. Like, that doesn't make sense. But it's also about the quality of the pressure. And it's about when the pressure comes in the down. If you allow a pressure at 5 seconds, I'm not going to care, because that ball should have been out 2.5 seconds ago. That should have been, okay, you did your job for 5 seconds. That's awesome. Well done. And when you have charting of this kind of magnitude, that you're looking at those kind of things. So when I look at it and I see that the Vikings had across the board, like if you want to use the PFF grades and you want to take a look and you go to the team page, and what they do is they have this thing called the lineup, and it just shows the starting lineup, and it shows kind of where they rank among all players of that ilk. And we've used this a lot, kind of as a collective whole, and it was used a lot with Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury in the past. And I know that they've gone on and they've played better under different offensive line coaches and in different teams and different schemes. That in itself is a negative against Chris Kuper. But I will say, I have it on good authority that specifically with Ed Ingram, that they knew he was going to take 3 to 4 years. And to my knowledge, the patience just wore thin, which also can explain why he's having so much success this year in comparison to what he was doing with the Vikings. So when you take a look at these PFF numbers, Darius Saw's 48th out of 89 tackles by PFF grade, which is a bang average. 48th of 80 for Donovan Jackson at guard. 4th of 38 for Kelly at center. 42nd of 80 guards for Will Fries. And O'Neal, 12th of 89 tackles. So when you look at those numbers, they're at worst like the 47th percentile. Nobody's a disaster. Nobody's awful. And that in itself tells you that, hey, do we really have an offensive line problem? Taking a look at all things considered. I keep having people in my mentions saying, oh, we desperately need to attack center. Center needs to be a high priority. We need to do this, that, and that. I'm going to be real with you. I think it's fair to want an improvement at center. This is under the assumption Ryan Kelly never plays football again, or at least never plays again for the Minnesota Vikings. I think, and this is my read on it, I think the Vikings are not going to believe that they have a problem at center, and they're going to be fine with the room they have. And I think Blake Brandel, if he just improves the snapping element, which he had never focused on before, Blake Brandel is an above average center, and he will be just fine. And if you go look back at great offensive lines the Vikings have had in the past, there's always been one spot that's just been good, been okay. That 09 team, Anthony Herrera, the 1998 team, that famed offensive line, Randall McDaniel's a Hall of Famer. Corey Stringer was probably the weakest guy on the offensive line. He was a 4th-year first-round pick at right tackle. He was good. And he would have continued. He was about to emerge as like a real star when unfortunately he passed away because of the heat stroke in training camp of 2001. If you have Blake Brandel there and you have star tackles who will presumably be healthy, and then you have an emerging really good player in Donovan Jackson who showed a lot as a rookie, and then Will Fries, who, look, he was a bang average tackle or guard, which is fine. I think he's paid too much to just be a bang average guard. I think he needs to be a good to very good guard to warrant the contract that the Vikings gave him. I'll give him, I think it's fair to be like, hey, you came in here, you really didn't have an offseason because of the broken leg. Now you're going to have a full offseason to work on your craft and not have to rehab. Now let's see you do it. Now let's see you be that guard that we paid for. And then if he doesn't do it, you move on and you take the $12 million dead cap hit, which will save about $10, $11 million in 2027. That leaves center. And if you have Blake Brandel as your center, you don't really have a hole in the offensive line. Your biggest holes now are swing tackle and that versatile interior offensive lineman that you were paying Blake Brandel to be. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good spot to be. I don't think you need to force center. I don't think you need to force offensive tackle. Now, some of that can come from, hey, you need to figure out a long-term situation with Brian O'Neill, but I think I'm under the assumption he's going to get extended because he's got a $23 million salary cap hit, and you could shrink that to around, it'll probably end up being about $8 million. So you'll save about $15 million just by giving him an extension, which makes all the sense in the world to do anyways. I think when you look at this offensive line, I don't think there are many issues. I think the issues that we have were some frustration with some of the coaching points, which Dave has talked about numerous times. The fact that there were so many injuries, and even like when Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill were playing, they were playing hurt. And that massively impacted their performances. Because remember, the way the Vikings offensive line kind of works is you ask Christian Darrisaw to be God. And there's merit to that because he delivers. But when he was injured and he couldn't get out laterally as quick because of the knee, and then he had an ankle and a foot thing, you kind of cratered. And you weren't able to kind of recover from that. Even Justin SKOL, who wasn't very good, but I think we have to recalibrate how we view SKOL because he was paid $2 million. And I think he was just fine for a swing tackle you paid $2 million to. The dude played almost 600 snaps. And at times he was a mitigated disaster. But you're also paying him for $2 million. And you did get some pretty good stretches of play from him, including that Browns game. When he had to face Myles Garrett one-on-one, he stonewalled him. What was the next gen stats number? 14 one-on-one reps, and he won all but one of them. And that pressure was like an elongated one where Carson Wentz is rolling out to his right and escaping through the B gap. Context, I think, is so important when we're having conversations about criticism. Because when you look at a guy like Justin Jefferson, if he plays really, really poorly, which he did the one game, like criticizing him for playing really, really poorly is way more warranted than criticizing Justin SKOL for playing way poorly. Why? You're not expecting Justin SKOL to play like an all-pro. You're just expecting Justin SKOL to not die on the field. That context to me is so important. And I think we miss that when we're having some of these conversations. We're just expecting Justin SKOL to not be an absolute disaster, just be passable. And for the majority of the season, he was passable enough, especially at just $2 million. You weren't paying him, expecting him to be good. You were expecting him to be, hey, you're going to be better than some rookie who we were going to draft. And Walter Rouse, who you did draft, couldn't get on the field, despite Justin SKOL having stretches where he was a disaster. So I think if you're going to fix something on the offensive line, now that you have a new coach coming in, it's about getting depth. Because I don't think you really need to fix anything on the front line. You don't need to fix any of the four concrete starters for right now. Center, I will listen to an argument, but when I hear, oh, it has to be your number one priority, I think we're missing the forest for trees a little bit here. Because Brandel, once that ball was snapped, was pretty good. Mm-hmm. And considering he had never snapped in a football game before in his life, before that Browns game, I think we're in a position where, hey, we can cut him a little slack, let him get a full offseason to practice snapping. And a lot of those issues that we saw where the snaps would spray all across. We had the same conversation with J.J. McCarthy's accuracy. Ball placement and snap placement are different than general accuracy. And that's why we have different stats that kind of bake them in, like completion percentage above expectation. J.J. McCarthy was poor in that because his ball placement was very poor despite being in the range of the player. That's where the catchable ball thing comes into play. Brandel wasn't snapping a very catchable ball, but he wasn't a disaster outside of that one snap against the Eagles. He was getting it in the vicinity, but he was making it difficult on the quarterback. So you give him an offseason. I think you have center. Plus, nobody wants to admit it, but Jurgens was pretty good at the end of the year. He was bad against the Steelers, but I think it's going to
depend on who is the new offensive line coach, and what is his philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
If he wants Brandel to work as center, Brandel's going to work as center all summer long. He's going to work on the snaps. If he prioritizes Blake as the sixth guy off the bench, then he's going to not get as much at that, and he's going to be the sixth man for the offensive line. It all depends on who they replace Kuper with.
Yeah.
And whoever replaces him is going to have some say when it comes to the draft.
Mm-hmm. I will say, even if you don't believe that, or you don't agree with me that, hey, we're going to be fine at center, I'm here to warn you, this offensive line draft class is bad. It's bad. And I don't think you're going to be able to get Tyler Linderbaum in free agency, because my personal opinion is the Chargers are going to throw the bag at him and you're not going to be able to get him. And I think that's warranted. And you might ask, well, why didn't the Ravens give him a fifth-year option? Well, they didn't give him a fifth-year option because it was tackle money. Like, the fifth-year option was like $25 million, which would be the highest for a center by like $7 million. And nobody would do that precedent. Nobody would do that. And I think that's a really big thing. And if you want to find a replacement at center, I guess I would challenge you. Where are you finding it? Because the best center in the draft is Connor Lew. He tore his ACL. And we know, like, not having him in rookie minicamp and probably most of training camp is not exactly an ideal situation. The offensive tackle class is rough. There's like two guys who are pretty solid in Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano. There's Francis Mauigoa from Miami, who might be better inside at guard. And the Vikings aren't taking a guard. Let's just be 100% real here. If they're going to take anybody, it's going to be a center or like a swing tackle, probably day 3. There just isn't a whole lot of, hey, this is going to be this massive upgrade for us available on the market. And it's just it's a tough situation. I think there's a part of the fan base that just wants like all pro players at every offensive line position, because we're so tortured by having poor offensive lines for 15 years that we just don't want to have any issues, any potential cracks, any foundational leaks to where it could end up being a problem. But I'll tell you, improved quarterback play will fix a lot of the offensive line issues. Quarterbacks were responsible for 18 of those 60 sacks, with 12 of them not being had nobody responsible for. And to my knowledge, those 12 sacks are going to be like, hey, they brought 6, you only had 5 to block, and there was nothing the quarterback could do. You're just done. Those are the kind of sacks. And look, McCarthy stunk most of the year. Carson Wentz stunk. Max Brosmer stunk. And one of the things I said on Twitter on Sunday was, if Sam Darnold would have played, I think this team wins 12 or 13 games. Because of what Sam Darnold could do, his decision-making acumen, his ability to maneuver in the pocket and be able to evade pressure, those things all matter a lot. And those things help or crush an offensive line. I think the offensive line is just fine. And I think there are more significant needs across the board. History King 888, which I think is my buddy Steven. Hey, Steven, says center looks better than last year. I'm going to be honest. Like, your best center is torn ACL. He might go mid round 2. Jake Slaughter, who has some serious strength flaws, even though I love him, All-American at Florida. He was a really good college center. But is he going to translate to the NFL? I don't know. Then you have day 3 guys like a Logan Jones, who has some size concerns as well. Like, I don't see this as being a good center class. You know what we should have done, Dave? Should have taken Creed Humphrey in 2021. That's what we should have done. Creed Humphrey and Christian Darrisaw. Oh,
we advocated for it.
If anybody wants to go back and watch the tape, that entire day 2, I was screaming about move up for Creed Humphrey, move up for Creed Humphrey, move up for Creed Humphrey. He was my 12th overall player there. I had him higher than Darisaw. And I will, as History King says, Brian Parker, just because Graham Barton moved from left tackle to center does not mean everyone else can do it. So I'm very hesitant to call him a quality prospect at center. Just because, well, we've never seen him do it. Doesn't mean he can't. But I have reservations. Because look at what we just saw with Brandel. Brandel played well, but the snaps went everywhere. Some guys just never figure out snapping. I don't know if you've ever tried snapping. Dave, I'm pretty sure you have because you played a line. Snapping's hard. And it's different than when you played because it's almost all shotgun now. It's finding consistency and then making it a catchable ball. It's hard to do. But
now,
if you want to go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was about to say, Mike Purple Husker has asked, well, who are some of the candidates to replace?
Well, in the draft, I really think there's nobody who will replace center this year. I don't think there's any day one starters.
To replace Kuper.
Coaches. Okay. Well, if you want to, I have a hot board on A2ZSports.com. The top options for the Minnesota Vikings. I'll read them off. There are some different names on here, some different styles, some with
and I haven't looked at your hot board.
Some with connections to KOC, some without connections to KOC. I'm just going to run through the names. And I talked to a friend of the show, AJ Schulte, who works with me at AZ Sports, who is a coaching expert. He understands these trees and schemes and how guys have grown and evolved throughout the course of their careers. So he put together a list, and then he kind of gave a few names that he really liked off of that list. So I'll just kind of blitz through them. And then, Dave, I'll give you the link if you would throw it in the comments. So if people want to, they can follow along. I just put it in our private chat. Vikings assistant O-line coach Keith Carter is obviously probably going to be a candidate. We even opined when he got hired that maybe they're hiring him to potentially replace Chris Kuper.
He was hired well, we talked about that, but he was hired specifically to help with the run game. And what improved this year was the blocking on the run game.
I also wonder if
his contract is expired too.
Is that official? I haven't seen anything on that.
Yeah, I think Alex Lewis said so.
Okay. I wouldn't be shocked if Curtis Modkins, the running back coach, gets replaced because I think he is the official run game coordinator. So that could end up being one of the big things here is when you talk about offensive line, so much of it is run game design, and our run game design's been, it's not creative. It's inconsistent. Like I'm just going to be real. I don't love it. I would like to see a little bit more design. I wanted Matt LaFleur to get fired and O'Connell to hire LaFleur because LaFleur's run game is insane. It's so good. It's so diverse. David, it's in the guest chat on eCam. It's so diverse and they use so many different elements. They love running counter and power. They love running zone and they'll do a lot of mismatch kind of stuff. It's so much fun to watch, which sucks because it's the Packers. So Keith Carter, Tampa Bay Bucs O-line coach Kevin Carberry, new offensive coordinator coming in. He may get replaced. Los Angeles Rams assistant O-line coach Zach Kromer. His dad, Aaron, was a very popular O-line coach for years in the NFL. He just retired yesterday. Atlanta Falcons O-line coach Dwayne Ledford. He potentially could stay, but I've heard that he's probably getting replaced. I think it'll probably end up being by Bill Callahan. Nothing's official. Nothing's official.
There was a tweet right before the show started that he will be released.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to have to write about that later.
One of my top prospects.
Indianapolis.
Why? Because he can develop young O-linemen.
And the only real development we had under Chris Kuper was Blake Brandel and Christian Darrisaw. And I'm going to be real when it comes to Darrisaw. I don't want to hear, he got drafted in the first round with talent. You still have to have development. And it's unfair to say that Kuper didn't help develop Darrisaw. He did. Like, could he be better if it wasn't Kuper? Yeah, maybe. but we can't just look at any talented player and completely absolve the coach from developing them at all. Because, yeah, like if I gave you, Dave, a filet mignon, you still have to know how to grill it. Doesn't matter how good the cut is, you still have to finish the deal. So here's some more. Indianapolis Colts assistant O-line coach Chris Watt. That Colts O-line's been really good for years, and they were great this year replacing Kelly and Fries. Dallas Cowboys assistant O-line coach Ramon Chinyung. Detroit Lions assistant O-line coach Steve Oliver. And that Lions O-line has been very solid for multiple years. And even with injuries, they found a way to maintain some level of continuity. New Orleans Saints assistant O-line coach Jari Evans, who was a Pro Bowl guard for the Saints. Very good football player. And that O-line was pretty solid in the first year of Kellen Moore. Seattle Seahawks assistant O-line coach and run game coordinator Justin Otten. I think that's how you pronounce it, Outten. Clint Kubiak, obviously, will get most of the credit, but him, Kubiak, and the O-line coach, they did a really good job with kind of a rough interior group. They drafted Gray Zabel. Zabel looked way better than I expected him to as a rookie. I thought he'd be more of a project. And he really surprised me and a lot of people. And lastly, 49ers assistant O-line coach Cameron Clemens. Who wouldn't want part of the Shanahan tree? If he wants to kind of stay with the wide zone kind of stuff, Dwayne Ledford or Nick Jones, who is the assistant O-line coach, would be a good move. Or he said Cameron Clemens. But if he wants to diversify, AJ believes Steve Oliver or Chris Watt would kind of be the options. I know in the chat, said Judd mentioned Mike Munchak. Look, O'Connell wanted Mike Munchak in 2022, and I think Munchak's just done coaching. And it'd be a pipe dream. It'd be great. But the whole idea of getting Kuper was, hey, he worked with Munchak for years and he's ready to kind of take that next step. So we'll take the Munchak protege. The Vikings couldn't get Fangio, so they did it with Donatel. Well, Donatel, he had his own problems. So they're similar to, but not similar at all. So a lot of interesting elements throughout this whole conversation, but I'll kind of wrap it up with this, and then we have some other coaching things to go on.
But you went all like assistant O-line coaches. Guys that are young, not been the head O-line coach before. There are O-line coaches available. Biggest name and probably the godfather of coaches is Bill Callahan.
To me, that's a non-starter. Here's why.
Stefanski's already said he's going to hire him.
Well, no, that's not even it. You have to hire Brian Callahan. They're a package deal.
Okay.
So they were never going to hire Brian Callahan. So for me, Bill Callahan was never an option. And I'll be honest, like those offensive lines in Tennessee with all those high draft picks, Dave, they weren't very good. So I'm not going to say Callahan's lost his fastball, but his latest resume, despite him having a phenomenal one overall, wasn't really that great. And when you have that package deal, it's like, I'm good.
Alex Lewis suggested was Frank Smith, was never a full-time O-line coach, but was deeply designed with the run under Staley and the Chargers. He's a Shanahan disciple.
Frank Smith was the offensive coordinator for the Dolphins for years. I'm very curious to see if he ends up following Mike McDaniel wherever he goes.
Possibly. Butch Barry is another one who's a pure wide zone guy, coached under Munchak, another disciple. Pat Meyer, more gap power guy. If you want to go strength, he's the guy. He coached at the Panthers, Chargers, Steelers. Mixed zone a little bit as well. He believes in strike first and a very aggressive style of football, style that I happen to like, but okay.
Sounds like Ed Ingram would thrive with him.
Dwayne Ledford, like we talked about, there was, like I said, there was a tweet, and I think it was from one of Schefter or somebody. He's being released. He's not going to be coaching Atlanta. And Zach Kromer, which I think you mentioned, another McVay Shanahan tree type with the Rams.
He's also the son of Aaron Kromer, and Aaron Kromer is one of the more respected O-line coaches in the league for like 2 decades. He was the architect of those really good Saints O-lines in the 2000s and 2010s with Sean Payton. Now, Sean Payton aside, that man knew how to hire coaches. So that's something to kind of be mindful of. It'll be interesting to see what they do because the run game needs to significantly improve from a design standpoint. And how do they want to approach it? Because they've started to lean more towards gap concepts over the course of the last however many years. And Cause and Effect asked if we go to the college ranks for coaching help. I don't know if there's an O-line coach good enough to want to pull up and be your O-line coach.
Or even an offensive coordinator or somebody like that that wants to go to the NFL and downgrade to be an O-line coach. I doubt it.
There aren't a ton of like great assistants that you could pull for that. Like if you're going to pull somebody, you're pulling a head coach to take a demotion as a coordinator in the NFL. That's what the Packers did with Jeff Hafley, and now he's the Dolphins head coach. So I understand the idea. I just don't think it's very plausible for kind of those reasons.
And especially since the college game the O-line play is not conducive for pro play. It is so far different. And the whole gin up for the pros takes so much longer because you're not getting, it's not like the mid-70s Huskers that are run style of football.
Yeah.
And plus it doesn't develop younger than that either. So
and part of the tough part about the college game is you can only do so much of, you have to take what the college game gives you, which is one of the reasons why the RPO became a thing. As give me a second, I am turning on the national championship game. I don't want to miss any of it.
We were asked to give our picks before we left this show.
I picked Indiana 45-20 over Miami. I think Indiana, they won their 2 playoff games by 34 and 35 points against top 10 teams. This is probably the worst of the 3 teams. You could argue them over Bama as far as quality. That's fine, whatever. That to me, they're relatively equal. But I think Indiana is just a better team. So that's where I'm leaning. Let's chat a little bit more here. There's a couple more things I want to talk about. The other head coaching hires. I think Kevin Stefanski being hired could end up being bad for the Minnesota Vikings in terms of quarterback. And here's what I mean. We talked the other week about Kirk Cousins having that modified contract. I think there's a real chance that Kevin Stefanski gets Kirk Cousins to stay in Atlanta. And that takes somebody off the board. And Atlanta might not have been an option for the Minnesota Vikings. Sorry, for competition. The Falcons might not have wanted to go get anybody of substance. So they could, because Penix is coming off that ACL. But because he's coming off the ACL, maybe they just do a new deal with Cousins because you have Kevin Stefanski. And Stefanski loves Cousins. They were continuously linked to trading for him when he was with the Browns. So that could end up being a factor. How some of these other jobs shape up, Malik Willis to Miami feels a hell of a lot more likely now because Jeff Hafley. I don't know if Hafley loves Willis, but you at least have the Packers connection there. Same with John Eric Sullivan, who took the GM job, which is one of the reasons why Hafley ended up going there. So all these coaching hires are going to be dominoes to fall. And one of the dominoes that fell was John Harbaugh taking the New York Giants job. And they just asked for an interview with Durante Jones, who has already had an interview with the Jets for their DC job. And he had 2 interviews now with the Dallas Cowboys. There's a real chance Jones gets hired before Flores makes a decision. And that could end up being a disaster for the Vikings because, to my knowledge, Jones is going to be the number 1 candidate if Flores chooses to go elsewhere. The next candidate up is Raheem Morris, and I want nothing to do with the Raheem Morris defense. I love the idea of Raheem Morris as a CEO type head coach. I didn't want him to be a coordinator. I didn't want him to run a unit. I wanted him to just control a team, have coordinators under him, and just run the whole show, do the in-game coaching stuff. So those things are going to play a really big impact. And Flores waiting on all these decisions is not good for the Minnesota Vikings, because they are, from my perspective, they are intentionally not interviewing other defensive coordinator candidates because they only want Flores to come back.
I'm looking at a report as of, nope, wrong. Never mind. Disregard. It's old.
Okay. Yeah. They haven't interviewed anybody. And I think it's posturing because they want to show Flores, hey, we're all in. We want you to be our defensive coordinator. And if it doesn't work out, like, I understand it, and I'm sure they have contingencies because Morris obviously coached with Kevin O'Connell in Los Angeles. And then you could look at other potential options. Like Durante Jones would be the obvious one. I have an article for A to Z Sports, which I will also send to Dave in the chat, and he can share with you guys of who I think would be the top candidates. The only one I don't have in there that people have talked about a lot is Patrick Graham. I'm not convinced he's going to leave the Raiders. I've got some interesting guys: Jonathan Gannon, Raheem Morris, Nick Rawlis. I love the idea of hiring Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rawlis. They were doing some crazy Zimmer Flores stuff in Arizona. That defense is fun. Gerard Mayo did not do well as a head coach, but I think as a defensive guy, he'd run some similar things to Flores, obviously from that Belichick tree. I think Matt Patricia's work at Ohio State this past year was tremendous. And I think coming back to the NFL could be something he's really interested in. And I think it could really work.
I mean, he probably makes more being an Ohio State head coach.
No, he's the defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
He's not a head coach. So
I'm curious what Ohio State's defensive coordinator makes.
I don't know what Patricia makes, but I know Jim Knowles was making somewhere around $3 million before he left for the Penn State job, and now he's at Tennessee. Obviously, Durante Jones. And then a wild card. He was Tem Lukabu. He is linebackers coach under Anthony Campanile for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who worked under Jeff Hafley as the defensive coordinator at Boston College. That's somebody who's kind of like a wild card to throw in there, but we'll see what ends up happening. They got to figure something out quick. And I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm going to send some messages here tonight asking, hey, what's the deal with X and Y? Like, are we looking at a situation with Brian Flores where the Vikings will get the compensatory picks? Because I haven't seen enough clarity in the language of there can't be a gap in your body of work. Well,
what does the gap mean? Does that mean
that's not clear?
I know that's the whole idea, because I've seen interpretations. Well, that just means if he coached this year with the Minnesota Vikings and he coaches next year with, say, the Steelers, the Minnesota Vikings get the compensatory picks. But I've also seen where it says, nope, if his contract expired and there's a day in between, then there's a gap, and no, he doesn't qualify for that.
Mm-hmm. My knowledge is, I believe once the new league year starts, you have to be employed. So I think that's the situation and not an expiring contract, but I could be wrong. And that's why I want to find out clarification, because to me, that's a big clarification, because that could cost the Vikings two third round compensatory picks, which, I mean, it would just suck. It wouldn't be anybody's fault. Everybody would just blame Kwesi. So, but it wouldn't be Kwesi's fault. And I'm very curious to kind of figure out what that language actually
could be the
means,
NFL screwing us because of a loophole.
Yeah. I'm gonna reach out to some people, because the way it's structured in the actual collective bargaining agreement under the Rooney Rule, it's not clear. It just says there can't be a break in employment. What does break mean? Does it mean season or does it mean contract? I haven't gotten an answer, and once I get it, I will share it. But that's going to do it for the show here tonight. I got to go cook dinner. We have a national championship game on, and Fernando Mendoza just took the field. He has more touchdowns than incompletions in the college football playoff this year. Thank you guys so much for watching. We're going to have a SKOL Search episode coming out this week talking wide receivers. And for those of you who love wide receivers, there's going to be a lot of that discussion because I am charged with writing the scouting report and player profiles for A to Z Sports. So that is going to be...
We might draft one high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The future of Jordan Addison is currently unknown. And because that's unknown, it creates a wrench in the discussion. So we're going to have that. We're going to have a lot more different SKOL searches. We're going to record at least one or two this week. I've got linebackers, cornerbacks, and we got a lot more coming up and a lot of great stuff. So you want to subscribe, ring the bell for those notifications. And remember, members get 12 hours of early access. So you will get to watch it on YouTube for the first 12 hours before it goes live to the public. Then all of those will come out on podcasts as individual players, making it a little easier for you to find and easier to consume instead of just a 1.5 hour show.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have all that.
Peter asks, is there going to be Kings of the North Wednesday? Yes, there will, and I'm hosting.
Perfect. And don't forget, even though it was on Sunday this week, Tool Bloggers is still on Saturday till after the Super Bowl.
We've switched. We're going to Sunday. Now.
Oh, Darren.
Now, the time will change. Probably next Sunday it'll be 11. Like I said, it'll be at least 2 hours. It'll be done 2 hours prior to any football game. And then once the Super Bowl is over, then it'll be 4 o'clock on Sundays.
There we go. And once we get anything on Flores dropping, once we get anything on anybody being hired or fired, we're going to try and go live. Saturday was a no-go. We're going to blame Darren Campbell. Just that's the theme of this. When Chris Kuper, he wasn't fired. He was not retained.
Right.
When we get big news, I'm going to be real. The vibes I'm kind of getting, I wouldn't expect a Wes Phillips firing. They just extended him. And to me, because they haven't fired anybody yet, I'm curious if they're just not going to fire people or they're just going to be like, hey, we're just not going to retain anybody. They did give Phillips an extension last year. That can't be overlooked. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!